What happens when the perfect life you've built turns out to be a carefully constructed lie? For Olivia Carter, a successful entrepreneur and devoted mother, the answer came on what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. As she stood in her wedding gown, ready to start a new chapter with the man she trusted, one small voice shattered everything she thought she knew. What follows is a story of betrayal, courage, and the unshakable bond between a mother and her daughter, a story that proves sometimes, the smallest voices carry the biggest truths. The sun rose over the sprawling estate like a golden promise, painting the world in hues of amber and cream. It was one of those mornings that seemed too perfect to be real, crisp air, birdsong drifting lazily through the trees, and an almost electric buzz of anticipation hanging in the atmosphere. The grand estate where Olivia Carter's wedding was set to take place looked like something out of a fairy tale. White roses cascaded down trellises, their petals shimmering with dew. Strings of twinkling lights were draped across the pergola, ready to glow as night fell. Every detail had been meticulously planned, from the crystal chandeliers suspended above the outdoor ceremony space to the delicate lace tablecloths adorning the reception tables. Inside the bridal suite, Olivia stood before a full-length mirror, her reflection gazing back at her with quiet confidence. Her gown was nothing short of breathtaking, a flowing masterpiece of silk and tulle, adorned with intricate embroidery that caught the light with every movement. She adjusted the veil resting lightly on her dark waves, her hands steady despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. After years of building her business empire, weathering heartbreaks, and raising her daughter alone, she had finally found someone who made her feel whole again. Daniel Crawford, a man whose charm was matched only by his wealth, had swept into her life like a warm summer breeze. He promised her stability, love, and a future filled with endless possibilities. But not everyone shared her excitement. 7-year-old Lily sat cross-legged on the plush rug near the doorway, her pale blue dress fanning out around her like a cloud. She clutched a small stuffed rabbit close to her chest, its fur worn soft from years of companionship. Her wide hazel eyes darted between her mother and the flurry of activity around them, the makeup artist adding final touches to Olivia's flawless complexion, the florist arranging bouquets of white lilies and baby's breath, and the photographer snapping candid shots of the bride-to-be. To anyone else, Lily might have appeared to be just another adorable flower girl preparing for her role in the big day. But beneath her calm exterior, there was a storm brewing. "Mama?" Lily's voice broke through the hum of conversation, soft but firm. Olivia turned away from the mirror, her smile radiant but slightly distracted. "Yes, sweetheart?" Lily hesitated, her fingers twisting nervously around the hem of her dress. For a moment, she looked so small, so fragile, that it tugged at Olivia's heartstrings. "Are you happy, Mama?" she asked, her tone carrying a weight far beyond her years. Olivia knelt down beside her daughter, smoothing a strand of hair behind Lily's ear. "Of course I am, sweetheart. This is a special day. We're starting a new chapter together, you, me, and Daniel." But Lily didn't return the smile. Instead, her brow furrowed, and her grip on the stuffed rabbit tightened. "I don't trust him," she said bluntly, her voice barely above a whisper. Olivia froze, her hand lingering mid-air. "What do you mean, Lily? Why would you say that?" "He's pretending," Lily insisted, her words sharp and certain. "He doesn't look at you the way Daddy used to. And when he thinks no one's watching, he looks different." A flicker of unease passed over Olivia's face, but she quickly masked it with a reassuring grin. "Oh, honey, you're just nervous because things are changing. Daniel loves us both very much. You'll see, he's going to make us a wonderful family." Lily opened her mouth to argue, but then thought better of it. Instead, she hugged her rabbit tighter and stared at the floor, her lips pressed into a thin line. Something about Daniel unsettled her, though she couldn't quite put it into words. Maybe it was the way his laughter always sounded forced, or how his compliments felt more like performances than genuine expressions of affection. Or maybe it was the way he never lingered too long in her presence, as if children were an inconvenience rather than a joy. Whatever it was, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As Olivia returned to the mirror to check her appearance one last time, her mind briefly wandered back to her late husband, James. He had been everything Daniel wasn't: warm, patient, and endlessly devoted to his family. His death 5 years ago had left a gaping hole in their lives, one that Olivia had worked tirelessly to fill, not just for herself, but for Lily. When Daniel entered the picture, he brought with him promises of security and happiness. At first, it had felt like a miracle. But now, standing here on the brink of forever, Olivia couldn't ignore the tiny seed of doubt that Lily's words had planted in her mind. Still, she shook off the thought. This was her wedding day, after all. There was no room for doubts or fears today. "Come on, Lily," Olivia said brightly, extending her hand. "Let's go meet your new daddy." Lily reluctantly took her mother's hand, but as they walked toward the door, she glanced back at the mirror one last time. In the reflection, she could have sworn she saw a shadow pass over Olivia's face, a fleeting expression of uncertainty that vanished as quickly as it appeared. And deep down, Lily knew this wasn't going to end well. The estate buzzed with life as Olivia stepped out of the bridal suite, her gown trailing behind her like a cloud. The morning sunlight filtered through the tall trees lining the pathway, casting dappled shadows on the ground. Guests mingled in small clusters, their laughter blending with the soft strains of music playing in the background. Everything seemed to shimmer with joy and anticipation, but Olivia couldn't shake the faint ripple of unease that had settled in her chest after Lily's earlier words. As she made her way toward the ceremony site, Michael Evans intercepted her path. Tall, broad-shouldered, and perpetually clad in jeans and a leather jacket even at formal events, Michael was the kind of man who exuded warmth without trying. He had been Olivia's best friend since college, the person she leaned on during her darkest days after James's passing. Now, standing before her with an expression both cautious and concerned, he looked more serious than usual. "Hey," Michael said, his voice low enough not to carry over the chatter around them. "You look beautiful." Olivia smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thanks, Mike. You clean up pretty well yourself." Michael chuckled softly but quickly sobered. His gaze flickered toward Daniel, who stood near the pergola chatting animatedly with some of the guests. "Are you sure about him?" he asked, his tone careful but probing. Olivia blinked, caught off guard by the question. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," Michael hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck, a nervous habit she knew all too well. "It's just, something feels off. I've heard things, Liv. Nothing concrete, just whispers. People talking about deals gone sideways, partnerships that ended badly. You should be careful." Olivia frowned, her defenses rising instinctively. "Careful? About what?" "Daniel's done nothing but support me since we met. He's helped me grow my business, introduced me to new opportunities." "I'm not saying he hasn't been good for your career," Michael interrupted gently. "But relationships aren't just about business, Liv. They're about trust. And I'm not convinced he deserves yours." For a moment, Olivia felt torn between irritation and uncertainty. She wanted to dismiss Michael's concerns outright, he always had been protective of her, but there was no denying the sincerity in his voice. Still, this was her wedding day. Today wasn't the time for doubts or second-guessing. "Mike," she said firmly, forcing a smile, "I appreciate your concern, really. But everything's fine. Trust me." Michael studied her face for a long moment before nodding reluctantly. "All right. Just, promise me you'll keep your eyes open, okay?" "I will," Olivia assured him, though her mind was already drifting elsewhere. She glanced toward Lily, who sat quietly under a nearby tree, watching Daniel with an intensity that seemed far too mature for a child her age. Meanwhile, Lily hadn't taken her eyes off Daniel since they arrived outside. While most of the guests were busy admiring the decorations or sipping champagne, she remained fixated on him, her small hands clutching her stuffed rabbit tightly. Something about the way he carried himself set her on edge, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes, the way his laughter sounded rehearsed rather than genuine. When Daniel excused himself from the group he'd been speaking with and stepped away from the crowd, Lily's curiosity turned into suspicion. Slipping away unnoticed, she followed him at a distance, staying hidden behind a row of hedges. Her heart pounded as she watched him pull out his phone and begin pacing along the edge of the garden. Daniel's demeanor changed instantly once he thought he was alone. Gone was the charming grin and polished charm. Instead, his features hardened, his jaw tightening as he spoke in a low, clipped voice. "She'll sign everything tomorrow," Daniel muttered into the phone, his tone cold and businesslike. "No complications. She trusts me too much to question it." Lily froze, her breath catching in her throat. Her wide hazel eyes darted between Daniel and the phone pressed against his ear. Who was he talking to? And what did he mean by sign everything? Daniel continued, oblivious to the little girl hiding just a few feet away. "Once the papers are finalized, we'll move forward with Phase 2. Make sure the accounts are ready for transfer. This has to go smoothly, no loose ends." Phase 2? Transfer? Loose ends? The phrases swirled in Lily's mind, each one more ominous than the last. She didn't fully understand what Daniel was planning, but one thing was clear: whatever it wasn't good. Her grip on the stuffed rabbit tightened until her knuckles turned white. For a fleeting moment, she considered running back to tell her mother everything she'd heard. But then doubt crept in. Would Olivia believe her? Or would she brush it off like she had earlier? Before Lily could decide what to do, Daniel abruptly ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. His charming mask slid back into place as he rejoined the guests, laughing and shaking hands as if nothing unusual had happened. Lily stayed rooted to the spot, her mind racing. Whatever Daniel was hiding, it was big and dangerous. Taking a deep breath, she finally emerged from behind the hedge and hurried back to where Olivia stood. Her mother was now surrounded by bridesmaids, adjusting the train of her gown and making last-minute preparations for the ceremony. Lily tugged gently on Olivia's sleeve, her voice trembling. "Mama," she whispered urgently. "We need to talk. It's important." Olivia glanced down at her daughter, surprised by the urgency in her tone. "What is it, sweetheart?" Lily hesitated, glancing nervously over her shoulder toward Daniel. "It's about Daniel. I heard him talking, and I think he's lying to us." Olivia's brow furrowed, but before she could respond, the wedding planner approached, clipboard in hand. 5 minutes until the ceremony begins," she announced cheerfully. Olivia gave Lily a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "We'll talk later, okay? Right now, let's focus on today." Lily nodded reluctantly, though her stomach churned with unease. As she took her place among the flower girls, her gaze lingered on Daniel, who stood confidently at the altar, his smile radiant and unshakable. Something told her this wedding wouldn't end the way everyone expected. The rehearsal dinner unfolded under a canopy of twinkling fairy lights, the estate's gardens transformed into an elegant outdoor banquet. Long tables draped in ivory linens stretched across the lawn, adorned with centerpieces of white roses and flickering candles that cast a warm glow over the scene. The air buzzed with laughter and conversation as guests mingled, sipping champagne and indulging in hors d'oeuvres. It was supposed to be a night of celebration, a precursor to the joyous union set to take place the following day, but for Lily Carter, it felt anything but festive. Sitting quietly at the edge of the table reserved for family, Lily picked at her food, her appetite non-existent. Her gaze kept drifting toward Daniel, who stood near the head of the table, regaling a group of guests with one of his polished anecdotes. His smile was wide, his gestures animated, but every time he glanced in Lily's direction, something about his expression shifted, just slightly, almost imperceptibly. A coldness crept into his eyes, a calculating glint that sent shivers down her spine. When their gazes met briefly, he gave her a tight-lipped smile before seamlessly returning to his charming persona. To anyone else, it might have seemed harmless. But to Lily, it felt like a warning. Olivia, seated beside her daughter, noticed Lily's unease but misinterpreted it as pre-wedding jitters. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she asked softly, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's face. Lily hesitated, her fingers twisting nervously around the napkin on her lap. She wanted to tell her mother everything, to recount what she'd overheard earlier and explain why she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. But how could she? Olivia had already dismissed her concerns once today. Would she do it again? "I'm fine, Mama," Lily murmured, forcing a small smile. "Just tired." Olivia nodded sympathetically, though her attention was quickly drawn back to the festivities. Guests were raising their glasses in a toast to the happy couple, and Daniel was now making his way toward them, his movements smooth and deliberate. He placed a hand on Olivia's shoulder, leaning down to whisper something in her ear. Whatever it was made her laugh, her face lighting up with genuine affection. Watching the exchange, Lily felt a pang of guilt mixed with frustration. How could her mother not see through his facade? Later that evening, after the dinner had wound down and most of the guests had retired to their rooms or left for the night, Lily lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her mind raced with thoughts of Daniel's earlier phone call and the cryptic words he'd spoken. What did he mean by assets and transfer? And why would Olivia sign papers without knowing what they entailed? The more she thought about it, the more convinced she became that Daniel wasn't just pretending, he was planning something. Determined to uncover the truth, Lily slipped out of bed and padded silently down the hallway. The grand estate was eerily quiet at this hour, the only sounds coming from the occasional creak of floorboards beneath her bare feet. She knew where Daniel's study was located. It was a room he often retreated to during visits, claiming he needed space to work. If there was any evidence of his plans, it would be there. Reaching the door, Lily pressed her ear against the wood, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it might give her away. At first, all she heard was silence. Then, faintly, came the sound of Daniel's voice. He was speaking again, his tone low and clipped, as if he didn't want to risk being overheard. "Once the paperwork is signed, it's done," Daniel said, his words sharp and deliberate. "The assets will be transferred, and she won't even know until it's too late. By then, it'll be irreversible." Lily's breath caught in her throat. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, nails digging into her palms. She wanted to burst into the room, confront him, demand answers, but she knew better. If Daniel discovered her eavesdropping, he might realize she knew too much. And that could put both her and her mother in danger. Instead, she forced herself to stay still, straining to catch every word. "The trust fund is key," Daniel continued, his voice tinged with satisfaction. "With control of that, I can liquidate everything within weeks. No one will suspect a thing, not until the money's gone and the properties are sold off." Lily's stomach churned. Trust fund? Properties? Was Daniel planning to steal from Olivia? The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Everything suddenly made sense, the way he'd swept into their lives so effortlessly, the way he pushed for the wedding to happen so quickly. It wasn't love driving him, it was greed. As Daniel wrapped up his conversation and began gathering papers from his desk, Lily retreated down the hallway, her mind spinning. She had to stop him, but how? Telling Olivia might not be enough, her mother trusted Daniel completely. Going to the authorities seemed impossible without proof. There had to be another way. Back in her room, Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, clutching her stuffed rabbit tightly. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away fiercely. Crying wouldn't solve anything. She needed a plan, one that would expose Daniel for who he truly was before it was too late. Her gaze fell on the laptop sitting on her bedside table. An idea began to form, fragile but promising. If she could find evidence of Daniel's scheme online, emails, documents, anything, it might be enough to convince Olivia of the truth. But accessing his files wouldn't be easy. She'd need help. And there was only one person she trusted enough to ask. The morning of the wedding dawned with a clarity that seemed almost surreal. Sunlight streamed through the windows of the bridal suite, casting golden beams across the room and illuminating every detail of Olivia's gown. She stood before the mirror, her reflection both radiant and troubled. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the veil one last time, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't quite silence. Was this really happening? Was she ready to take this step? Michael entered the room quietly, his boots clicking softly against the hardwood floor. He carried 2 cups of coffee, one for himself, one for Olivia, but his expression was anything but relaxed. His brow was furrowed, his jaw set in a way that suggested he'd been up all night wrestling with something heavy. "You don't look like a bride about to walk down the aisle," he said bluntly, handing her the coffee. Olivia forced a smile, though it felt brittle on her lips. "Just cold feet," she replied lightly, taking a sip of the steaming liquid. But even as she spoke, the unease in her stomach twisted tighter. It wasn't just nerves, it was something deeper, more primal. A voice in the back of her mind whispered warnings she didn't want to hear. Michael studied her face, his piercing blue eyes searching for answers she wasn't ready to give. "Liv," he began carefully, "I know you think I'm overstepping, but, are you sure about this? About him?" Olivia sighed, setting the coffee cup down on the vanity. "Mike, we've been over this. Daniel loves me. He's good for Lily and me. Why does everyone keep questioning it?" "Because love isn't supposed to feel like walking into a storm," Michael shot back, his tone sharper than usual. "You deserve someone who makes you feel safe, not someone who leaves you second-guessing everything." His words struck a nerve, and for a moment, Olivia faltered. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again, unsure of what to say. Deep down, she knew there was truth in what Michael was saying. But admitting it would mean unraveling everything she'd worked so hard to build, the life she thought she wanted. "I'll be fine," she finally said, her voice softer now. "Really?" Michael didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, squeezing gently. "If you need me, I'm here. No matter what." She nodded, grateful for his loyalty even if she couldn't fully accept his advice. As he stepped out of the room to check on the preparations, Olivia turned back to the mirror. Her reflection stared back at her, beautiful yet haunted. For the first time, she wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. Outside, the ceremony site was a vision of perfection. Guests filled the rows of white chairs, their murmurs blending with the gentle rustle of leaves overhead. The pergola gleamed under the morning sun, adorned with cascading flowers and flowing ribbons. Everything was ready, except for the bride herself. Lily stood at the edge of the aisle, clutching her basket of rose petals tightly. Her small frame was dwarfed by the grandeur of the setting, but her presence commanded attention. Unlike the other flower girls, who giggled nervously or fidgeted with their dresses, Lily remained eerily still. Her hazel eyes darted between her mother, waiting at the entrance to the aisle, and Daniel, standing confidently at the altar. Her heart pounded in her chest like a drumbeat, each thud echoing louder than the last. She had spent hours rehearsing what she would say, practicing how to make people listen. Now, as the string quartet began playing the familiar notes of the wedding march, she took a deep breath and stepped forward. The crowd turned as one, watching expectantly as the flower girls began their procession. But instead of scattering petals along the path, Lily stopped dead center in the aisle. Her voice rang out loud and clear, cutting through the music like a knife. "Stop," she cried, her tiny frame shaking but resolute. "You can't do this, Mama." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Conversations halted mid-sentence, heads whipped around in shock. Even the musicians froze, their instruments falling silent. All eyes were on Lily, who stood alone in the spotlight, her face pale but determined. Olivia turned sharply, her heart hammering in her chest. "Lily," she called, her voice trembling. "What are you doing?" Tears welled in Lily's eyes, but she blinked them away fiercely. "Mama, please," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "Daniel's lying to us. He's not who he says he is." The crowd erupted into whispers, confusion spreading like wildfire. Olivia's gaze shifted from Lily to Daniel, who stood frozen at the altar, his charming smile slipping ever so slightly. For a split second, his mask cracked, revealing the cold calculation beneath. Then, just as quickly, he recovered, stepping forward with an expression of concern. "Olivia," he said smoothly, his voice carrying easily over the murmurs of the guests. "She's just nervous. Let's calm her down and continue, shall we?" But Olivia hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to listen to her daughter. She looked back at Lily, whose small hands clutched the hem of her dress like a lifeline. There was desperation in her eyes, a raw honesty that couldn't be ignored. "Lily," Olivia said gently, kneeling down to meet her daughter's gaze. "What do you mean? What did you hear?" Before Lily could answer, Michael appeared at the edge of the aisle, his expression grim. "Let her speak, Liv," he urged, his voice firm. "This is important." For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The weight of the decision pressed down on Olivia, heavier than any wedding gown could ever be. Should she dismiss Lily's warning and proceed with the ceremony, trusting that her instincts were wrong? Or should she listen to her daughter, and to the nagging doubts that had plagued her since yesterday, and risk everything? Her eyes flickered toward Daniel, who now wore a practiced smile, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. Something about him felt off. Not quite right. And for the first time, Olivia allowed herself to question whether she truly knew the man she was about to marry. "Tell me, Lily," Olivia whispered, her voice barely audible above the hushed whispers of the crowd. "What did you find out?" Lily swallowed hard, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He's trying to take everything from you, Mama. I heard him talking. He's going to steal your money and your business and leave us with nothing." The words hung in the air like thunderclouds, dark and ominous. Olivia's breath caught in her throat as she processed what Lily had said. Could it be true? Was Daniel using her, for her wealth, her assets, her trust? Her gaze snapped back to Daniel, searching his face for any sign of guilt or deception. But he only smiled wider, his charm unwavering. "Darling," he said soothingly, "she must have misunderstood something. Children often imagine things, you know." Olivia's resolve wavered, but only for a moment. Deep down, she knew Lily wouldn't lie about something like this. Not when it mattered so much. "No," Olivia said firmly, rising to her full height. Her voice carried across the stunned crowd, steady and unyielding. "Not today." And with those 3 words, the ceremony came to an abrupt halt. The silence that followed Lily's accusation was deafening. The once cheerful atmosphere of the wedding ceremony had dissolved into a tense standoff, with every guest frozen in place, unsure of what to do or say. All eyes were on Olivia, who stood at the center of it all, her face pale but resolute. Her daughter's words echoed in her mind, each syllable cutting deeper than the last. "He's lying," Lily repeated, her voice trembling but unwavering. "He's using you, Mama." Daniel moved swiftly, stepping forward with an expression of practiced concern. His movements were smooth, calculated, designed to defuse the situation before it spiraled further out of control. He knelt slightly, bringing himself closer to Lily's eye level, though his smile never reached his eyes. "She's just scared," he said softly, his tone dripping with reassurance. "It's understandable. She misses her father and doesn't want things to change." For a moment, Olivia almost believed him. Daniel's words were persuasive, his demeanor calm and collected. But then she glanced at Lily, whose small frame shook with emotion, tears streaming down her cheeks as she clutched her stuffed rabbit for support. There was no malice in her daughter's gaze, only fear and desperation. And Olivia knew, deep down, that Lily wasn't lying. Before Olivia could respond, Michael stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. He placed a protective hand on Lily's shoulder, his expression stern as he addressed Olivia. "Liv," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Maybe you should listen to her." Daniel's jaw tightened imperceptibly, though his smile remained intact. He turned to Olivia, his grip on her arm tightening ever so slightly, a gesture meant to reassure but one that felt possessive instead. "This is your moment," he murmured under his breath, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "Don't let her ruin it." Olivia froze, her breath catching in her throat. For the first time, she saw something in Daniel's eyes that sent a chill down her spine. It wasn't anger or frustration, it was calculation. A cold, calculating gleam that made her stomach churn. She pulled her arm away instinctively, taking a step back. The movement was subtle, but it didn't go unnoticed. Daniel's smile faltered for the briefest of moments, replaced by a flicker of irritation. Then, just as quickly, his mask slipped back into place. "Olivia," he said, his voice louder now, carrying across the crowd. "Let's not make decisions based on a child's misunderstanding. We can talk about this later, privately." But Olivia wasn't listening anymore. Her mind raced as pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. The whispers Michael had mentioned, Lily's unease, Daniel's insistence on rushing the wedding, all of it pointed to something far darker than she had allowed herself to imagine. She looked at Lily again, her heart breaking at the sight of her daughter standing there, so small yet so brave. How could she have dismissed her concerns so easily? How could she have ignored the warning signs? "No," Olivia said finally, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "If there's even a chance Lily's right, I need to know the truth." Daniel's smile vanished completely, replaced by a cold, hard stare. "Olivia," he warned, his tone sharp now, "don't do anything rash. Think about what you're throwing away." "I am thinking," she shot back, her voice rising. "I'm thinking about my daughter. About my family. About everything I've worked so hard to build, and whether I'm willing to risk it all for someone I barely know." The crowd gasped audibly, their murmurs growing louder as they realized the gravity of the situation. Some guests exchanged uneasy glances, while others leaned forward, eager to see how the drama would unfold. But Olivia paid them no mind. Her focus was entirely on Daniel, who now stood rigid, his charming facade crumbling with each passing second. "You don't understand," Daniel snapped, his composure slipping further. "You're making a mistake, a huge one." "Am I?" Olivia countered, her voice laced with defiance. "Or are you afraid I'll find out the truth?" For a moment, Daniel said nothing. His eyes darted around the crowd, searching for an escape route, a way to salvage the situation. But there was none. Every pair of eyes was trained on him, waiting for his next move. Finally, he straightened, his expression hardening into something unrecognizable. "Fine," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "If you're too blind to see what's right in front of you, then maybe you deserve whatever happens next." With that, he turned on his heel and stormed off, disappearing into the estate without another word. The crowd erupted into shocked whispers, but Olivia barely noticed. Her attention was on Lily, who ran to her and threw her arms around her waist, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm sorry, Mama," Lily choked out between tears. "I didn't mean to ruin your day." Olivia knelt down, pulling her daughter close. "You didn't ruin anything, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved us." Michael approached cautiously, his expression a mix of relief and concern. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. Olivia nodded, though her hands still trembled. "I will be," she said, her voice firm despite the turmoil swirling within her. "Thanks to Lily." As the reality of what had just happened began to sink in, Olivia felt a strange sense of clarity wash over her. The wedding may have been called off, but in its place was something far more valuable, the truth. And with it came the promise of a future built on trust, not lies. The tension in the air was palpable as Daniel stormed away, his polished shoes crunching against the gravel path leading back toward the estate. His abrupt departure left behind a stunned silence, broken only by the soft sniffles of Lily and the hushed whispers of the guests. Olivia remained frozen in place, her arms still wrapped protectively around her daughter. Her mind raced, replaying every interaction she'd ever had with Daniel, the way he always seemed to steer conversations toward finances, the subtle pressure he applied whenever she hesitated about signing documents, the cold detachment that occasionally flickered in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. But before anyone could fully process what had just happened, the sound of approaching footsteps drew everyone's attention. 2 police officers appeared at the edge of the aisle, their uniforms crisp and their expressions serious. They moved with purpose, cutting through the crowd until they reached the altar where Daniel had been standing moments earlier. "Daniel Crawford," one of the officers announced, his voice firm and authoritative. "We need you to come with us." The crowd erupted into murmurs once again, confusion mingling with shock. Daniel froze mid-step, his back stiffening as he turned slowly to face the officers. For the first time since Olivia had met him, his carefully constructed mask slipped entirely. Shock flashed across his features, followed swiftly by fury, a raw, unfiltered anger that sent a shiver down Olivia's spine. "What is this about?" Daniel demanded, his tone clipped but laced with barely contained rage. He glanced around at the sea of faces staring back at him, searching for an ally or an explanation, but finding neither. "We'll discuss it at the station," the officer replied evenly, gesturing for Daniel to accompany them. "Please don't make this difficult." Daniel's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. His gaze darted between the officers, the crowd, and finally, Olivia. When their eyes met, there was no trace of charm or warmth, only venom. "You'll regret this," he hissed under his breath, his words low enough for only her to hear. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Olivia stared at him, her heart pounding but her resolve unwavering. For so long, she had doubted herself, questioned whether she was being paranoid or unfair. But now, seeing him cornered, exposed for who he truly was, everything clicked into place. The pieces of the puzzle fit together perfectly, painting a picture she couldn't ignore. "No," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "No, I won't." Her words hung in the air like a challenge, sharp and unyielding. Daniel's lips curled into a sneer, but he didn't respond. Instead, he allowed the officers to lead him away, his shoulders rigid with indignation. As they disappeared down the path, the crowd erupted into a flurry of whispered speculation. "What's going on? Did you see that? Do you think it's true?" Olivia tuned out the noise, focusing instead on the small figure clinging to her side. Lily looked up at her with wide, tear-filled eyes, her lower lip trembling. "Mama, is it over?" she asked softly, her voice barely audible above the din. Olivia knelt down, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's face. "Yes, sweetheart," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's over." Lily threw her arms around Olivia's neck, holding on tightly as if afraid she might disappear. Olivia hugged her back, tears streaming down her own cheeks. She had spent years building a life for herself and her daughter, determined to create something stable and safe after losing James. And while today hadn't gone according to plan, she realized now that it had been a blessing in disguise. If not for Lily's courage, she might have walked blindly into a disaster. Michael approached cautiously, his expression a mix of relief and admiration. "You handled that like a champ," he said, offering Olivia a small smile. "I'm proud of you." Olivia managed a weak laugh, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "I couldn't have done it without Lily, or without you." Michael shrugged modestly. "Hey, I just called it like I saw it. You're the one who made the tough call." As the initial chaos began to settle, guests started filtering out of the ceremony site, some murmuring apologies, others casting curious glances over their shoulders. The once beautiful setting now felt hollow, tainted by the events that had unfolded. But Olivia didn't care. None of it mattered, not the flowers, not the decorations, not the dress she wore. What mattered was that she and Lily were safe. Later that evening, after most of the guests had left and the estate grew quiet once more, Olivia sat with Lily in the living room. The two of them curled up on the couch together, surrounded by blankets and mugs of hot chocolate. It was a simple moment, but one filled with profound gratitude. "I'm sorry your big day didn't go as planned," Michael said, leaning against the doorway with a sheepish grin. "But hey, at least you dodged a bullet." Olivia smiled faintly, her gaze drifting toward the window. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting the sky in hues of orange and pink. "It wasn't my big day," she corrected softly. "It was supposed to be the start of something new. But sometimes, endings are just as important." Lily yawned, resting her head on Olivia's shoulder. "Can we watch a movie tonight?" she asked sleepily. "Of course," Olivia replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her daughter's head. "Whatever you want." As Michael excused himself to give them some privacy, Olivia leaned back against the couch, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, there would be questions to answer, legal matters to untangle, and wounds to heal. But for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. Hopeful that she had escaped a fate worse than loneliness. Hopeful that she and Lily could rebuild their lives together, stronger than ever. And hopeful that, someday, love would find its way back to them, not because they needed it, but because they deserved it. The estate was eerily quiet now, the once vibrant celebration reduced to an empty shell of its former self. The guests had dispersed, some offering awkward condolences before leaving, others simply slipping away without a word. The remnants of the wedding, the flowers, the candles, the carefully arranged chairs, stood as silent witnesses to what had transpired. But none of it mattered anymore. Not to Olivia. As the police car carrying Daniel disappeared down the long driveway, Olivia felt the weight of everything crash over her like a tidal wave. Her legs gave out beneath her, and she collapsed to her knees on the soft grass, clutching Lily tightly against her chest. Tears streamed down her face, hot and unrelenting, as the full magnitude of what had almost happened sank in. "I should have listened," she whispered hoarsely, her voice barely audible above the rustling leaves overhead. "I should have trusted you." Lily didn't pull away. Instead, she wrapped her small arms around Olivia's neck, holding on with a strength that belied her age. Her voice, though soft, carried a certainty that cut through Olivia's despair. "You heard me now," Lily said simply, her words laced with quiet conviction. "That's all that matters." Olivia pressed her forehead against Lily's shoulder, her body trembling with emotion. How could she have been so blind? For months, Daniel had woven his web of lies, charming her with promises of security and love while hiding his true intentions. And she, desperate to provide a stable future for her daughter, had fallen for it hook, line, and sinker. She had ignored the warning signs, the whispers from Michael, the unease in her gut, and most importantly, Lily's instincts. But Lily hadn't given up. Even when no one else believed her, even when Olivia herself had dismissed her concerns, Lily had refused to stay silent. It was her bravery, her unwavering determination to protect her mother, that had saved them both. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," Olivia murmured, pulling back slightly to look into Lily's wide hazel eyes. "I let you down. I should have believed you from the start." Lily shook her head, her expression solemn but resolute. "You didn't mean to. You just wanted us to be happy." Olivia's heart ached at the simplicity of her daughter's forgiveness. At 7 years old, Lily understood more about love and trust than many adults ever would. She wasn't angry or resentful, she only wanted her mother to feel safe again. "Thank you," Olivia said, her voice breaking as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "Thank you for being brave enough to speak up. For saving us." Lily leaned her head against Olivia's shoulder, her grip tightening ever so slightly. "We're okay now, Mama. We'll be okay." For a long moment, they stayed like that, mother and daughter clinging to each other amidst the wreckage of what could have been. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the lawn and bathing the scene in a golden glow. It was beautiful, almost serene, a stark contrast to the turmoil swirling inside Olivia. But even in the midst of chaos, there was peace to be found in knowing they were together, unharmed, and free. Eventually, Michael approached, his footsteps slow and deliberate. He knelt beside them, placing a gentle hand on Olivia's shoulder. "You two need anything?" he asked softly, his voice filled with concern. Olivia shook her head, though she managed a faint smile. "Just time. Time to process everything." Michael nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. "Take all the time you need. I'll handle cleanup here." "Thank you, Mike," Olivia said, her gratitude evident in every syllable. "For everything." He offered her a reassuring smile before standing and walking away, leaving them alone once more. As the sound of his retreating footsteps faded, Olivia turned her attention back to Lily, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "We're going to be all right, aren't we?" Olivia asked, her tone lighter now, tinged with hope. Lily nodded vigorously, her lips curving into a small but genuine smile. "Yeah. We've got each other." And that was enough. Later that evening, after the last traces of the wedding had been cleared away and the estate fell silent, Olivia sat with Lily in the cozy living room. They curled up together on the couch, surrounded by blankets and pillows, watching one of Lily's favorite movies. The flickering light from the television cast a warm glow over the room, creating a sense of normalcy that Olivia desperately needed. Despite everything that had happened, there was comfort in these simple moments. Comfort in knowing that their bond, strengthened by trials and triumphs alike, was unbreakable. As the credits rolled and Lily drifted off to sleep, her head resting gently on Olivia's lap, Olivia allowed herself to reflect on the day's events. She thought about Daniel, the man who had nearly destroyed everything, and how close she had come to making the biggest mistake of her life. She thought about Michael, whose loyalty and honesty had never wavered, even when she doubted him. And most of all, she thought about Lily, whose courage and wisdom had reminded her of what truly mattered. Love wasn't about grand gestures or fairy tale endings. It was about trust, vulnerability, and standing by each other through thick and thin. Olivia realized now that she already had everything she needed right here, with her daughter, her best friend, and the lessons she had learned along the way. As she tucked Lily into bed later that night, Olivia paused in the doorway, watching her daughter sleep peacefully. A sense of calm washed over her, replacing the fear and uncertainty that had plagued her earlier. Tomorrow would bring challenges, yes, but also opportunities. Opportunities to rebuild, to heal, and to rediscover the joy of living authentically. For the first time in a long time, Olivia felt ready to face whatever came next. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, the sky heavy with clouds that mirrored Olivia's lingering unease. Though the immediate crisis had passed, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to uncover, more pieces of Daniel's plan hidden in plain sight. The weight of betrayal lingered like a shadow, refusing to dissipate until she understood the full extent of what he had intended to do. After tucking Lily into bed the night before, Olivia had spent hours lying awake, her mind racing with questions. What exactly had Daniel been planning? How far had his deception gone? And most importantly, how close had she come to losing everything? She knew the answers lay somewhere within the estate, in Daniel's study, where he had spent countless hours working on business matters. Now, as the first light of day filtered through the windows, Olivia made her way to the room she had always thought of as off-limits. It wasn't just Daniel's private workspace, it had become a symbol of his secrecy, his carefully constructed facade. Standing outside the door, she hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the knob. Then, steeling herself, she turned it and stepped inside. The study was immaculate, as always, a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil swirling within Olivia. A sleek mahogany desk dominated the space, its surface cluttered with neatly stacked papers, a laptop, and an expensive fountain pen. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled not only with books but also with framed photographs of Daniel posing with influential figures, politicians, CEOs, celebrities. Each image seemed designed to project success, power, and trustworthiness. But now, they felt hollow, like props in a play meant to deceive. Olivia began her search methodically, starting with the desk drawers. Her hands trembled slightly as she sifted through folders and documents, each one revealing fragments of Daniel's scheme. There were bank statements showing suspicious transfers, contracts outlining asset liquidations, and emails detailing partnerships that reeked of exploitation. But it was the power of attorney papers that stopped her cold. Her name was scrawled across the document in bold ink, granting Daniel complete control over her finances, properties, and business holdings. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. He hadn't just planned to marry her, he had planned to strip her of everything she owned. Every penny, every property, every ounce of independence would have been transferred into his hands without her even realizing it until it was too late. A wave of nausea washed over her, but she forced herself to keep going. She needed to see it all, to understand the depth of his betrayal. As she continued digging, she found spreadsheets detailing timelines, contingency plans, and worst-case scenarios. It was chillingly thorough, almost clinical in its precision. Daniel hadn't acted out of impulse or greed alone, this had been a calculated operation, meticulously planned and executed. When Michael appeared in the doorway sometime later, Olivia was seated at the desk, surrounded by piles of incriminating evidence. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep, but there was a fierce determination in her expression that hadn't been there before. "Liv?" Michael asked cautiously, stepping inside. "You okay?" She looked up at him, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "He was going to take everything," she said flatly, holding up the power of attorney papers. "Every single thing I've worked for, all of it. Gone." Michael's jaw tightened as he scanned the document, his expression darkening with anger. "Son of a," he cut himself off, exhaling sharply. How could anyone be so calculating? So cruel? Olivia shook her head, her fingers gripping the edge of the desk tightly. "I don't know. But I do know one thing, not anymore." Her words carried a quiet strength, a resolve born from survival. For months, Daniel had manipulated her, playing on her vulnerabilities and insecurities. He had preyed on her desire for stability, her longing to create a new family for Lily. But now, armed with the truth, Olivia refused to let him win, not in spirit, not in memory, not in any way. "What are you going to do?" Michael asked, pulling up a chair beside her. "I'm going to make sure he pays," Olivia replied firmly. "Not just for me, but for anyone else he might have hurt along the way." Michael nodded, admiration flickering in his eyes. "You're stronger than you think, Liv. Always have been." She managed a faint smile, though her gaze remained fixed on the papers spread out before her. "I didn't feel strong yesterday. If it weren't for Lily. She's incredible, Michael agreed, his tone softening. Just like her mom. For a moment, they sat in silence, the gravity of the situation settling between them. Then Olivia straightened, brushing a strand of hair from her face. We need to gather everything, every document, every email, every piece of evidence. We'll turn it over to the authorities and let them handle the rest. Already on it, Michael said, pulling out his phone. I'll call my lawyer friend. She specializes in fraud cases. She'll know exactly what to do. As Michael stepped out of the room to make the call, Olivia returned to the task at hand, her movements purposeful and deliberate. She sorted through the documents, organizing them into categories: financial records, legal agreements, correspondence. Each item added another layer to the story, painting a clearer picture of Daniel's deceit. But amidst the chaos of discovery, something unexpected began to emerge, a sense of clarity. For so long, Olivia had allowed fear and self-doubt to cloud her judgment. She had second-guessed herself, questioned her instincts, and ignored the warning signs. Now, faced with undeniable proof of Daniel's betrayal, she realized she had underestimated her own strength. By the time Michael returned, Olivia had compiled a comprehensive file, complete with annotations and summaries. She handed it to him with a mixture of relief and resolve. This is everything, she said simply. Make sure it gets to the right people. You got it, Michael assured her, tucking the folder under his arm. And hey, don't forget to breathe, okay? You've earned a break. Olivia nodded, though she knew resting wouldn't come easily. Not yet. There was still work to be done, loose ends to tie up, and a future to rebuild. But for the first time in days, she felt hopeful. Hopeful that justice would prevail. Hopeful that she and Lily could move forward, unburdened by the lies that had nearly destroyed them. As Michael left to deliver the evidence, Olivia took a moment to step outside. The air was crisp, carrying with it the promise of rain. She stood on the porch, gazing out at the sprawling estate, the same place where she had once dreamed of beginning a new chapter. That dream may have ended, but another was waiting to begin, one rooted in truth, resilience, and love. 2 days after the wedding that never was, Olivia received a call from Michael. His tone was urgent, clipped. He's out on bail, he said without preamble. Be careful, Liv. Olivia felt her stomach tighten, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had known this moment might come, that Daniel would fight back, try to reclaim control, or at least attempt to intimidate her into silence. But she wasn't the same woman who had stood trembling in that aisle just days ago. Now, armed with evidence and resolve, she was ready. Later that evening, as dusk settled over the estate, the sound of tires crunching against gravel signaled Daniel's arrival. Olivia stood on the porch, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, watching as his sleek black car pulled up to the house. He stepped out slowly, his usual charm replaced by something darker, something dangerous. Gone was the polished smile, the easy confidence. In its place was a cold, calculating glare that sent a shiver down her spine. Olivia, he called out, his voice sharp and biting. We need to talk. She didn't move, didn't flinch. Instead, she met his gaze head-on, her expression unwavering. There's nothing left to say, Daniel. He approached the steps leading up to the porch, stopping just short of where she stood. For a long moment, they stared at each other, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife. You think you've won? Daniel finally spat, his words laced with venom. You think exposing me changes anything? No, Olivia replied evenly, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. But you lost. And that's all that matters. Daniel's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. You don't know what you're playing with, he warned, his tone low and menacing. This isn't over. It is for me, Olivia shot back, taking a step forward. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to let him see her fear. You underestimated me, and my daughter. That was your first mistake. Underestimating us was your last. For a moment, Daniel said nothing. His eyes darted around the property, searching for some way to regain the upper hand. But there was none. The game was over, and he knew it. Before he could respond, the distant wail of sirens pierced the air. Both of them turned toward the sound, watching as two police cars rolled down the driveway, their lights flashing ominously in the fading light. Daniel's face darkened, his composure slipping further as officers stepped out of the vehicles and approached the house. This isn't necessary, Daniel snapped, turning back to Olivia. Whatever they told you, it's lies. All of it. Olivia didn't answer. Instead, she reached into the folder she'd been holding and pulled out a single document, the final piece of evidence tying Daniel to his scheme. It was an email chain detailing not only his plans to seize her assets but also implicating him in similar frauds targeting other victims. She handed it to one of the officers, her movements deliberate and unhurried. "We'll take it from here, ma'am," the officer said, glancing briefly at the document before addressing Daniel. "Sir, we need you to come with us." Daniel's expression shifted rapidly, from shock to fury to desperation. "You can't do this," he shouted, his voice rising as panic set in. "Do you have any idea who I am? Who I'm connected to?" The officer remained unfazed. "We're well aware of who you are, Mr. Crawford. And that's exactly why we're here." As the officers moved to restrain him, Daniel turned back to Olivia, his eyes blazing with hatred. "You'll regret this," he snarled, struggling against their grip. "Mark my words, you haven't seen the last of me." Olivia held his gaze, her expression icy. "No, Daniel. You haven't seen the last of me." With that, the officers led him away, his protests fading into the distance as the police cars drove off once more. The estate fell silent again, save for the gentle rustle of leaves in the cool evening breeze. Michael appeared beside her moments later, his expression a mix of relief and admiration. "That took guts," he said softly, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You handled that like a pro." Olivia exhaled deeply, the weight of the confrontation finally beginning to lift. "I wasn't going to let him scare me anymore," she admitted, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "Not after everything he tried to take from us." Michael nodded, his gaze drifting toward the horizon. "You did the right thing, Liv. Not just for yourself, but for anyone else he might have hurt." She smiled faintly, though her thoughts drifted to Lily, who was safely tucked away in her room upstairs. "It's not about revenge," Olivia said quietly. "It's about justice. About making sure he can't hurt anyone else." Michael studied her for a moment, his respect evident in every line of his face. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, you know that?" Olivia shrugged modestly, though a small part of her acknowledged the truth in his words. Over the past few days, she had faced her fears, confronted her doubts, and stood up to someone who had sought to destroy her. It hadn't been easy, in fact, it had been terrifying, but she had done it. And in doing so, she had reclaimed not just her life but her sense of self-worth. "Thank you, Mike," she said finally, her voice filled with genuine gratitude. "For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." "Anytime," he replied with a grin. "Now, how about we get some dinner? You look like you could use a break." Olivia laughed softly, the sound carrying a hint of relief. "That sounds perfect." As they walked inside together, Olivia paused briefly in the doorway, glancing back at the driveway where Daniel's car had been parked just moments earlier. The memory of his threats lingered, but it no longer held power over her. She had faced the worst he could throw at her, and she had emerged victorious. Inside, the house felt warmer somehow, lighter. Lily sat curled up on the couch, engrossed in a book, her presence a comforting reminder of why Olivia had fought so hard. As she joined her daughter and Michael in the living room, Olivia allowed herself to relax for the first time in days. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would still be legal proceedings, media attention, and lingering questions about trust. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was that she and Lily were safe, and that they had each other. And sometimes, Olivia realized, that was enough. The weeks that followed Daniel's initial arrest were a blur of legal proceedings, media coverage, and sleepless nights. Olivia had expected the process to be grueling, but nothing could have prepared her for the sheer weight of it all. Every day brought new revelations about Daniel's schemes, how he had preyed on vulnerable individuals, manipulated their trust, and left them financially ruined. The scope of his crimes was staggering, far beyond what Olivia had imagined when she first uncovered the documents in his study. But through it all, she remained steadfast. With Michael by her side and Lily's unwavering support, Olivia navigated the chaos with a quiet determination that surprised even herself. She attended every court hearing, provided statements to investigators, and cooperated fully with authorities. Each step forward felt like reclaiming a piece of her life, a piece Daniel had tried to take away. Finally, the day came when justice would be served. It was a crisp autumn morning, the kind where the air carried a bite of cold but the sun shone brightly overhead, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps. Reporters lined the entrance, microphones at the ready, eager to capture the final chapter of a story that had captivated headlines nationwide. Olivia stood among them, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and relief. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Rows of spectators filled the benches, murmuring quietly as they awaited the verdict. At the center of it all sat Daniel, his once charming demeanor replaced by an air of defiance. His tailored suit hung slightly looser now, evidence of the stress and confinement he had endured during his brief stint in jail. But his eyes still burned with the same cold intensity that had sent chills down Olivia's spine during their final confrontation. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. The verdict was delivered swiftly, each word landing like a hammer blow, guilty on all counts. Fraud, embezzlement, identity theft, the list went on, a damning indictment of the man who had once seemed so perfect. As the gavel struck, sealing his fate, a collective sigh rippled through the crowd. For many, it was closure. For Olivia, it was vindication. Daniel rose slowly from his seat, flanked by officers who moved to escort him out of the courtroom. Before leaving, he turned to Olivia, his lips curling into a sneer. "You'll never be free of me," he spat, his voice low but venomous. "I'll haunt you, Olivia. You'll see." Olivia met his gaze without flinching, her expression calm and resolute. "No, Daniel," she replied, her voice steady and clear, carrying just enough force to silence the murmurs around them. "I already am." Her words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. For a moment, Daniel's mask slipped entirely, revealing the raw hatred beneath. But then, just as quickly, he masked it again, turning away with a dismissive scoff. As the officers led him out of the room, his figure disappeared behind a set of heavy wooden doors, closing this chapter of Olivia's life forever. Outside the courthouse, the scene was chaotic. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and bystanders whispered amongst themselves. Olivia stepped onto the marble steps, shielding her eyes against the bright sunlight. Beside her, Michael offered a reassuring smile, while Lily clung to her hand, her small fingers intertwined with Olivia's own. "Are you okay?" Michael asked softly, leaning closer so only she could hear. Olivia nodded, though her grip on Lily's hand tightened ever so slightly. "Better than okay," she admitted, her voice tinged with emotion. "It's over, Mike. Really over." Michael placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did it, Liv. You took him down, and you protected your family. That's something to be proud of." Lily looked up at her mother, her wide hazel eyes filled with admiration. Does this mean we're safe now, Mama? Olivia knelt down, pulling her daughter into a tight embrace. Yes, sweetheart, she whispered, pressing a kiss to the top of Lily's head. We're safe. And we're stronger because of it. As the three of them made their way to the car, the reporters trailing behind them shouting questions about forgiveness, resilience, and moving forward, Olivia allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She thought about how close she had come to losing everything, not just her wealth or her business, but her sense of self-worth, her independence, her future. And yet, here she was, standing tall despite the storm that had threatened to break her. She realized now that freedom wasn't just about escaping someone else's control, it was about reclaiming your own power. About trusting yourself, listening to your instincts, and refusing to let fear dictate your choices. Daniel might have tried to destroy her, but in doing so, he had inadvertently given her the tools to rebuild, to become stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever before. That evening, back at the estate, Olivia sat with Lily in the living room, the two of them curled up together under a blanket. The television played softly in the background, though neither of them paid much attention to it. Instead, they talked, about the past few weeks, about the lessons learned, and about the future that lay ahead. What happens now, Mama? Lily asked, her voice soft but curious. Olivia smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. Now, we live, she said simply. We laugh, we dream, we build something beautiful together. No one gets to take that away from us, not anymore. Lily nodded, snuggling closer to her mother. I love you, Mama. I love you too, sweetheart, Olivia replied, her voice thick with emotion. More than anything. As the fire crackled in the hearth and the wind rustled the trees outside, Olivia felt a profound sense of peace wash over her. The scars of the past would always remain, but they no longer defined her. What mattered now was the present, and the promise of tomorrow. And for the first time in a long time, Olivia believed in that promise wholeheartedly. The days following Daniel's sentencing passed in a haze of quiet reflection and slow rebuilding. The media circus eventually died down, the reporters moving on to newer stories, leaving Olivia and Lily to reclaim their lives in peace. The estate, once a symbol of what could have been, a grand wedding, a fresh start, now felt like a sanctuary. It was no longer tainted by lies or betrayal, instead, it had become a place of healing, where wounds could mend and new dreams could take root. One crisp autumn morning, as the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, Olivia and Lily sat together on the porch. The wooden swing creaked softly beneath them, swaying gently with each push of Olivia's foot against the floorboards. A blanket was draped loosely over their legs, warding off the chill of the early morning air. They sipped steaming mugs of hot chocolate, the rich aroma mingling with the earthy scent of fallen leaves scattered across the yard. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, it was peaceful, filled with the kind of unspoken understanding that only comes from shared hardship. The sky shifted slowly from deep indigo to soft pink, then gold, as the sun rose higher, casting its warm glow over the sprawling estate. Birds chirped lazily in the distance, and the occasional breeze rustled through the trees, carrying with it the promise of renewal. Finally, Lily broke the silence, her voice small but steady. Are we going to be okay, Mama? Olivia turned to look at her daughter, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. Lily's hazel eyes were wide, searching hers for reassurance. In that moment, Olivia realized how much strength her little girl had shown, not just during the chaos of the past few weeks, but throughout their entire journey. At 7 years old, Lily had faced fears most adults would struggle to endure, and yet she had emerged resilient, wise beyond her years. We already are, Olivia replied softly, her voice carrying a conviction she hadn't felt in a long time. She reached out, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's face and tucking it behind her ear. We've been through something really hard, sweetheart. But we made it. Together. Lily nodded thoughtfully, her gaze drifting back to the sunrise. Do you think Daddy would be proud of us? The question caught Olivia off guard, and for a moment, she struggled to find the words. James had been her rock, her partner, her everything, and losing him had left a void in their lives that nothing could ever fully fill. But even in his absence, his memory lived on in the lessons he had taught them: kindness, courage, and the importance of standing up for what was right. I know he would be, Olivia said finally, her voice thick with emotion. He'd be so proud of how brave you've been, Lily. And of how strong we've been, together. Tears welled in Lily's eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of letting go of the fear and uncertainty that had weighed so heavily on her tiny shoulders. She leaned into Olivia's side, resting her head on her mother's shoulder. I miss him, Mama. I do too, sweetheart, Olivia whispered, pulling her closer. Every day. But I think he's still here, with us, in a way. Watching over us. Helping us get through the tough times. They sat like that for a while, wrapped in each other's embrace, watching as the world awakened around them. The sun climbed higher in the sky, painting the landscape in hues of amber and rose. It was breathtakingly beautiful, a reminder that even after the darkest storms, light always returned. Later that afternoon, Michael stopped by, bringing with him a box of donuts and a cheerful grin. Figured you two might need some sugar therapy, he said, holding up the box triumphantly as he stepped onto the porch. Lily giggled, hopping off the swing to greet him. Donuts, she exclaimed, grabbing one before Olivia could protest. Careful, Miss Carter, Michael teased, ruffling her hair affectionately. Save some for the rest of us. Olivia laughed, shaking her head as she accepted a cup of coffee from him. You're spoiling her rotten, you know that? Someone's gotta keep the fun alive around here, Michael shot back, winking at Lily before taking a seat beside Olivia. He glanced at her, his expression softening. How are you holding up? Olivia sighed, leaning back against the swing. Better than I expected, she admitted. It's not easy, letting go of everything that happened. But I feel lighter somehow. Like I can breathe again. Michael nodded, his gaze thoughtful. That's good. You deserve it, Liv. Both of you do. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching as Lily chased leaves across the lawn, her laughter ringing out like music. It was a simple moment, but one filled with profound meaning. Life wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was enough. More than enough. You know, Michael said after a while, breaking the quiet, you're stronger than you realize. What you went through, not everyone would have come out the other side like you did. Olivia smiled faintly, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee mug. I didn't do it alone. I had Lily. I had you. Without either of you, I don't know where I'd be. Well, lucky for you, we're not going anywhere, Michael replied with a grin. So get used to having us around. Olivia chuckled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't afraid of the future. She didn't have all the answers, and she knew there would still be challenges ahead. But she also knew she wasn't facing them alone. As the afternoon wore on, the three of them lingered on the porch, talking, laughing, and simply enjoying each other's company. The weight of the past few months still lingered, but it no longer felt suffocating. Instead, it served as a reminder of how far they had come, and how much they had to look forward to. When the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and purple, Olivia stood and stretched, glancing down at Lily, who had curled up on the swing, half asleep. Time for bed, sweetheart, she said gently, scooping her daughter into her arms. Mama? Lily murmured sleepily, her eyelids fluttering. Yes, sweetheart. I'm glad we're okay. Olivia pressed a kiss to her forehead, her heart swelling with love. Me too, Lily. Me too. As Olivia carried Lily inside, she paused briefly in the doorway, gazing out at the darkening estate. The scars of the past would always remain, but they no longer defined her. What mattered now was the present, the laughter, the love, the moments shared with those who mattered most. And for the first time in a long time, Olivia felt truly free. The weeks turned into months, and slowly but surely, life at the estate began to change. The remnants of the ill-fated wedding were long gone, flowers replaced with fresh plants, decorations repurposed or donated, the once grand ceremony site transformed into a quiet garden where Olivia and Lily could sit and reflect. It wasn't just the physical space that was being rebuilt, it was their lives. Piece by piece, moment by moment, they were creating something new, something stronger, more authentic. Olivia threw herself into her work, channeling her energy into revitalizing her business. She had always been driven, but now there was a renewed sense of purpose behind everything she did. Every decision, every meeting, every late night spent poring over spreadsheets felt like a reclaiming, not just of her company, but of herself. She hired a team of trusted advisors, people who shared her vision and values, and together they worked to rebuild what Daniel's schemes had nearly destroyed. But it wasn't just about the business. Olivia made a conscious effort to prioritize what truly mattered: Lily, her health, her happiness. They spent weekends exploring nearby parks, baking cookies in the kitchen, and curling up on the couch for movie nights. Simple pleasures became sacred rituals, reminders of how far they had come, and how much they had to be grateful for. Through it all, Michael remained a constant presence in their lives. He stopped by often, sometimes with groceries or takeout, other times just to check in and see how they were doing. His unwavering support had been a lifeline during the darkest days, and even as things improved, his friendship continued to anchor them. One crisp winter afternoon, Olivia stood in the backyard, overseeing the construction of a small greenhouse she had decided to build. It was a project born out of necessity. She wanted to grow her own herbs and vegetables, but also one of symbolism. The greenhouse represented growth, resilience, and the ability to nurture life despite harsh conditions. As she watched the workers assemble the frame, Michael approached, carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "Thought you could use a pick-me-up," he said, handing her one of the cups with a grin. Olivia accepted it gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warmth. "You're a lifesaver," she replied, taking a sip before turning back to watch the progress. "What do you think?" "It's looking good," Michael said, nodding approvingly. "Kind of poetic, isn't it? Starting fresh, planting seeds, literally and figuratively." Olivia chuckled softly, though there was truth in his words. "Yeah, I guess it is. Feels like a new start." Michael glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "It is a new start. For both of us." She raised an eyebrow, surprised by the inclusion. "Both of us?" He shrugged, a sheepish smile tugging at his lips. "Well, yeah. You've been through hell, Liv. Helping you get through it, it's made me realize some things too. About what's important. About family. About sticking around when people need you." Olivia felt a lump rise in her throat, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had always known Michael was loyal, but hearing him put it into words like this touched her deeply. "I don't know what I would have done without you," she admitted quietly. "Honestly, Mike. You've been my rock." "And you've been mine," he replied simply, his voice steady but sincere. "We've got each other's backs. Always." For a moment, they stood in companionable silence, watching as the greenhouse took shape against the backdrop of the fading sunlight. The air was cool, carrying with it the faint scent of pine from the trees lining the property. Somewhere nearby, Lily's laughter rang out as she chased after their dog, Max, her giggles filling the otherwise quiet afternoon. "She's amazing, you know," Michael said after a while, nodding toward Lily. "Stronger than most adults I know." Olivia smiled, her gaze softening as she watched her daughter play. She gets it from her dad, she said wistfully. James was always so brave, so selfless. Sometimes I wonder if she remembers him the way I do, or if she just knows him through stories. Does it matter? Michael asked gently. Either way, he's part of her. Part of both of you. And that's not something anyone can take away. Olivia nodded, feeling a wave of comfort wash over her. James might be gone, but his legacy lived on, in Lily's courage, in the love they shared, in the lessons he had taught them about resilience and hope. That evening, after dinner, Olivia and Lily sat together in the living room, surrounded by blankets and pillows. The fireplace crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Lily was working on a drawing, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration as she sketched flowers and trees. "What are you making, sweetheart?" Olivia asked, leaning over to peek at the paper. "A picture of our new garden," Lily replied proudly, holding it up for her mother to see. "See? There's the greenhouse, and there's Max, and there's you and me." Olivia's breath caught in her throat as she studied the drawing. It was simple yet beautiful, a child's interpretation of their world, filled with color and light. In the center of the page, two stick figures stood hand in hand, smiling brightly beneath a yellow sun. Surrounding them were vibrant flowers, tall trees, and a little house with smoke curling from the chimney. "It's perfect," Olivia whispered, pulling Lily into a tight hug. "Absolutely perfect." Lily beamed, snuggling closer to her mother. "Do you think Daddy would like it?" "I know he would," Olivia replied, her voice thick with emotion. "He'd love it. Just like he loves you." As they sat together, bathed in the golden glow of the firelight, Olivia felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The scars of the past would always remain, but they no longer defined her. What mattered now was the present, the love she shared with Lily, the friendships that sustained her, the dreams she dared to chase. And as she looked around the cozy room, listening to the crackle of the fire and the sound of Lily humming softly to herself, Olivia realized something: she didn't need a fairy tale ending to be happy. Happiness wasn't about perfection or grand gestures, it was about connection, authenticity, and finding joy in the everyday moments. "Mama?" Lily asked suddenly, breaking the quiet. "Are we going to plant flowers in the greenhouse tomorrow?" Olivia smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "Yes, sweetheart. We'll plant as many as we want. Together." Lily grinned, her eyes lighting up with excitement. "Can we name them? Like Daisy and Rose?" "Of course," Olivia replied, laughing softly. "Whatever you want, sweetheart. This is your garden too." As Lily returned to her drawing, Olivia leaned back against the couch, letting the warmth of the fire seep into her bones. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, carrying with it the promise of spring. Winter was ending, and with it came the hope of renewal, not just in the world around them, but within themselves. For the first time in a long time, Olivia felt ready to embrace whatever the future held. Not because she had all the answers, but because she knew she didn't have to face it alone. The days grew longer as spring approached, the estate coming alive with the promise of renewal. The greenhouse Olivia had dreamed of was finally complete, its glass panes gleaming in the morning sunlight. Inside, rows of seedlings stretched toward the light, their delicate leaves reaching for warmth and nourishment. It was a labor of love, a testament to resilience, growth, and the power of starting over. As Olivia stood among the plants, tending to them with care, she found herself reflecting on everything that had brought her here. The journey hadn't been easy, far from it, but every challenge, every heartache, had shaped her into the person she was today. She thought about Daniel, about the lies he had spun and the devastation he had nearly caused. But more than anything, she thought about Lily, the little girl who had refused to stay silent, whose courage had saved them both. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of lavender and gold, Olivia sat on the porch with a notebook in hand. She often wrote when she needed to process her thoughts, finding solace in putting pen to paper. Tonight, however, she wasn't writing for herself. She was writing for anyone who might need to hear what she had learned, for anyone who had ever doubted their instincts or ignored the warnings of those they loved. She began slowly, her words flowing like a quiet stream. Sometimes, the truth comes from the smallest voices. And those are the voices we should never ignore. Olivia paused, glancing up at the stars beginning to twinkle in the night sky. Her mind drifted back to the day of the wedding, the moment Lily had stepped into the aisle, trembling but resolute, and spoken the words that changed everything. At the time, Olivia hadn't fully understood the weight of what her daughter was trying to say. She had doubted, hesitated, even dismissed her concerns. But now, looking back, she realized how wrong she had been. Trust isn't just about believing in others, she continued, her voice soft but steady. It's about believing in yourself. About listening to that quiet voice inside you, the one that tells you when something feels off, when someone isn't being honest. Too often, we silence that voice because it's easier to pretend everything is fine. But ignoring it doesn't make the problem go away. Sometimes, it only makes it worse. She set the pen down briefly, leaning back in her chair as memories washed over her. She thought about the months of uncertainty, the sleepless nights spent questioning her own judgment. She thought about Michael, who had stood by her side through it all, reminding her to trust her instincts even when she couldn't. And most of all, she thought about Lily, whose unwavering faith in her mother had never wavered, not even when Olivia had failed to believe her. When someone you love tries to warn you, Olivia wrote, picking up the pen again, listen. Really listen. They see things you might miss. They feel things you might overlook. Love gives them clarity, courage, even when fear clouds your vision. Don't dismiss their words because they're young, inexperienced, or different from you. Their perspective matters. Their truth matters. Her gaze drifted toward the greenhouse, where the faint glow of string lights illuminated the tender shoots within. Each plant represented a new beginning, a chance to grow, to thrive, to become something beautiful despite the challenges it faced. In many ways, Olivia felt like one of those seedlings, fragile yet determined, reaching for the light after a long winter of darkness. Resilience isn't about never falling, she added, her handwriting growing bolder as her conviction strengthened. It's about getting back up every time you do. It's about learning from your mistakes, facing your fears, and choosing to move forward, even when the path ahead seems uncertain. Life will test you. People will disappoint you. But if you hold on to what truly matters, if you surround yourself with love, honesty, and hope, you'll find your way. Tears welled in her eyes as she wrote the final lines, her heart swelling with gratitude for the lessons she had learned, and for the people who had helped her learn them. In the end, she concluded, her voice barely above a whisper, we are stronger together. Stronger than betrayal. Stronger than fear. Stronger than anything that tries to break us. And no matter how hard the journey gets, there is always light waiting on the other side, if you're willing to look for it. When she finished, Olivia closed the notebook and set it aside, taking a deep breath as the weight of her words settled over her. She didn't know if anyone would ever read what she had written, but that wasn't the point. Writing it had been cathartic, a way to honor the pain she had endured and the strength she had discovered along the way. Lily appeared in the doorway moments later, bundled in her favorite fleece blanket. "Mama," she called softly, rubbing her eyes sleepily. "Are you coming to bed?" Olivia smiled, rising from her chair and walking over to scoop her daughter into her arms. "I'm coming, sweetheart," she replied, pressing a kiss to Lily's forehead. "Just finishing up some thoughts." "What kind of thoughts?" Lily asked curiously, resting her head against Olivia's shoulder. "About how brave you are," Olivia said, her voice thick with emotion. "And how much I love you." Lily giggled, wrapping her arms around Olivia's neck. I love you too, Mama. As they stepped inside together, the house felt warm and inviting, filled with the sounds of laughter and the faint crackle of the fireplace. Michael sat in the living room, flipping through channels on the TV, while Max lounged lazily at his feet. The scene was simple, ordinary even, but to Olivia, it was perfect. Later that night, as she tucked Lily into bed, Olivia lingered in the doorway, watching her daughter drift off to sleep. The room was quiet except for the rhythmic sound of Lily's breathing, steady and peaceful. For a moment, Olivia allowed herself to imagine James standing beside her, his arm draped lightly across her shoulders, smiling down at their daughter. "You'd be so proud of her," Olivia whispered, her voice barely audible. "Of both of us." With that, she turned off the light and closed the door softly behind her, stepping out into the hallway where Michael waited. "How's she doing?" he asked quietly, nodding toward Lily's room. "Perfectly," Olivia replied, her smile genuine. "She's happy. Safe. That's all I ever wanted." Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You did good, Liv. Real good." Olivia chuckled softly, shaking her head. "We did good. All of us." They shared a quiet moment of understanding before heading downstairs, where the fire still burned low in the hearth. Olivia sank onto the couch, pulling a blanket over her legs as Michael handed her a mug of tea. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, carrying with it the promise of spring. For the first time in a long time, Olivia felt truly at peace. The scars of the past would always remain, but they no longer defined her. What mattered now was the present, the love she shared with her family, the friendships that sustained her, the dreams she dared to chase. And as she gazed out the window at the star-filled sky, Olivia knew one thing for certain: no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would face them with courage, resilience, and an unshakable belief in the power of love. At the heart of Olivia's story lies a powerful lesson about trust, resilience, and the courage to listen. It's a reminder that sometimes, the people closest to us see things we can't, or won't, see ourselves. Whether it's a child speaking from a place of pure honesty or a friend offering unwavering support, their voices matter. Ignoring them doesn't just risk missing the truth, it risks losing something far more valuable: the connections that keep us grounded. Olivia's journey teaches us that life is unpredictable, and not every chapter will be easy. But even in the darkest moments, there is strength to be found, in ourselves, in our loved ones, and in the choices we make to move forward. Betrayal may have shaken her world, but it was love, trust, and resilience that rebuilt it. Her story shows us that while we can't control everything that happens to us, we can control how we respond, and that makes all the difference. If Olivia's story resonated with you, then don't miss the chance to dive into more tales like this one. Every week, we bring you compelling stories filled with drama, emotion, and lessons that stay with you long after the final word. Whether it's overcoming adversity, finding unexpected hope, or learning to trust your instincts, these narratives are crafted to inspire and connect. So, if you're ready for more gripping stories that challenge your perspective and tug at your heartstrings, take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update, and join a community of viewers who appreciate storytelling at its finest. Because the next unforgettable story is just around the corner, and you won't want to miss it. Thank you for being here, and remember, every ending is just the beginning of something new.